Death. It's the one certainty we all face, isn't it? A universal truth.
Absolutely. No escaping it.
But what if death arrives not at its appointed time, but well before? What if there's this whole other spiritual layer to it? Something known in ancient Indian texts as Akaal Mrityu, basically untimely death.
That's exactly what we're diving into today.
Yeah, we're exploring this idea, and honestly, it might shift how you view life's final chapter.
Our journey into this concept will draw heavily from some key ancient Indian texts. We're talking primarily the Garuda Purana, but also bringing in insights from the Bhagavad Gita.
Okay.
And specifically for this deep dive, our source is an excerpt from the Divine Tales YouTube channel. They have a video called which translates to Why Does a Man Die Untimely?
Right.
And this exploration, I think, promises to unveil some, surprising details about what actually causes these kinds of deaths, and maybe even more fascinatingly, what happens to the souls caught in this unique spiritual situation. It's a perspective you might not have encountered before.
Okay, right. Let's unpack this then. The very idea, that death isn't just one single event, but it can actually have different categories.
Exactly. The sources are really clear on this fundamental point. Death is certain for everyone born. That's a given.
Yeah.
But the way death occurs, the circumstances surrounding it, that can differ dramatically.
So what is Akaal Mrityu specifically? How do they define it?
Akaal Mrityu is defined as a situation where the physical human body is destroyed, yes, but crucially, the soul remains tethered. It stays connected to the earthly world.
Stays here, so it doesn't move on.
Precisely. This prevents the soul from achieving moksha, liberation. And the texts say these souls can actually remain on Earth for centuries. Just stop.
Centuries? Wow. Okay, that's quite a thought.
And what's so fascinating here is the distinction they're making. It's profound. Unlike, let's say, natural death, where a soul might typically get a new body relatively quickly, the texts mention different timelines, like 3, 10, 13, maybe 40 days.
Right, a normal cycle.
Akaal Mrityu signifies a real disruption to that natural cycle, a kind of spiritual impasse, if you will. It leads to the soul's prolonged presence right here in the worldly realm.
Okay, so if death does have a right time, a natural cycle, what makes certain circumstances, like, say, drowning or starvation, specifically untimely in that spiritual sense? Not just tragic accidents, but spiritually significant.
That's a great question. What are the reasons, according to these texts?
Yeah.
Well, you've hit on something crucial. The 7th chapter of the Garuda Purana actually details some very direct physical causes.
Like what?
Dying from extreme hunger or starvation, consuming poisonous substances, drowning in water. These are all explicitly cited as leading to Akaal Mrityu. And interestingly, the source also states that Akaal Mrityu can happen because of any illness, if that illness cuts life short prematurely.
Any illness. So it's not just like accidents or external causes.
Apparently not just those, no. If it ends the life before its destined span.
Okay, that makes sense for the direct physical causes. But you mentioned earlier there's more to it.
Yes. If we connect this to the bigger picture, these physical causes are certainly direct, right? Obvious. But the sources also dive much deeper into a kind of karmic explanation.
Ah, okay, karma.
Which really forces us to ask, doesn't it? How do our own actions, our spiritual adherence or lack thereof, actually play a role in our lifespan?
How does that work?
Well, Vishnu, in his conversation with Garuda in the Garuda Purana, addresses this. He explains that, yes, the Vedas might state a human lifespan is, say, 100 years.
Right, I've heard that figure.
But that's not an absolute guarantee. It doesn't automatically account for what the texts call misdeeds, or daskarma.
Misdeeds, okay.
A person's actual time on Earth, their life duration, it decreases if they lack the strength, the spiritual fortitude, to perform righteous deeds, what's called dharmakarya.
Okay.
Or if their body, maybe through illness or neglect, no longer even permits them to perform these righteous deeds.
I see. So capacity matters too.
Capacity matters. And maybe most crucially, if someone willfully abandons righteous deeds, makes a conscious choice to turn away from dharma.
That seems like a key point, the willful part.
It is. And there's another powerful insight here. Just a lack of knowledge about Dharma, about the Vedas, can lead people to unknowingly commit bad deeds. They don't even realize they're doing wrong.
So ignorance isn't bliss in this context?
Not at all. It can inadvertently shorten their lifespan. It's not just about intentional malice, but also about, not knowing any better.
Wow. That's quite a heavy thought, that a lack of knowledge could have such a direct impact. So, okay, if a life is cut short like this, for whatever reason, physical or karmic. What becomes of that soul then?
Yeah, what happens?
If it doesn't complete its intended lifespan, it's chakra, as you called it.
The texts paint a pretty vivid and frankly difficult picture. Souls who suffer Akaal Mrityu, they don't complete that predetermined life cycle.
Yeah.
And as a consequence, they suffer greatly after death because the death was sudden, unexpected. Their desires, their cravings, their thirsts. The texts use words like icha, kamanau, trishna. They remain totally unfulfilled.
So they're still attached to earthly things.
Deeply. The soul's attachment, its moha, doesn't just vanish, it lingers powerfully, which means they're constantly tormented by these unresolved earthly longings.
And I imagine this spiritual unrest, it must have consequences for those still living, the family left behind.
Absolutely. These Akaal Mrityu souls, driven by those very unfulfilled desires, might even try to reach out, try to connect with their family members to somehow get those needs met.
Reach out? How?
Well, the texts describe them wandering. Unlike souls from natural deaths who move on, these Akaal Mrityu souls become various types of restless spirits. The sources list specific forms.
Oh, really?
Yes, things like Buddha, Preta, Pishacha, Kushmanda, Brahmarakshasa, Vetala, Chatrapali. Each name represents a unique kind of spiritual unrest, an unfulfilled state. They simply do not find peace. They're caught.
That's incredibly specific, not just ghosts, but distinct categories. Now, the sources also seem to highlight one particular type of untimely death as being especially tragic, spiritually speaking. It's a difficult topic, I know, but important to understand in this context.
Yes, they do. Suicide. It's described in the texts as the most condemnable, the most deplorable form of Akaal Mrityu.
Why so severe?
Lord Hari, or Vishnu, is quoted as stating that taking one's own life is equivalent to insulting the Paramatma, the Supreme Soul, God itself. It's seen as rejecting the divine gift of life.
And the consequence for the soul?
The texts say such souls attain neither heaven nor hell. They exist in a state known as agrat. It's described as a kind of profoundly painful spiritual limbo.
Limbo.
And their suffering in this akrat state is said to be amplified, even more intense than that of others who experience untimely death through other means. It's the most severe consequence.
That's very heavy. Are there other specific transformations mentioned? You listed those general types of spirits, but any other specific examples?
Yes, the texts do give a couple of other specific examples which kind of illustrate the diverse ways this unresolved state can manifest.
Okay.
For instance, it's mentioned that if a young man dies an untimely death, he becomes a churel. Now, in folklore, that's often depicted as a kind of malevolent female spirit or witch. It represents this sort of unfulfilled, chaotic energy.
Interesting. And for women?
If an unmarried woman dies an untimely death, the texts say she wanders in Devyoni. This is described as a more subtle spiritual plane, but still indicative of her unresolved earthly existence. She's still tethered by that unfulfilled potential, unable to fully move on.
So these specific examples really drive home the point about the enduring attachment and lack of peace.
Exactly. They're vivid illustrations of that core concept.
Okay, so we've explored the causes, physical, karmic, and this really challenging fate for the souls. What does this all mean for those left behind? For the family, is there anything they can actually do?
Is there any hope for these souls?
Yeah, is there any way to bring peace to them or to help their journey along?
This is where the focus really shifts, interestingly. It moves from just the individual soul's fate to the profound role of the living. It really speaks to this deep sense of familial and spiritual connection that, according to these texts, transcends even death.
So what actions can family members take?
The text recommends several specific practices: performing tarpan, which involves making offerings, often in rivers or ponds,
Right.
offering pindadan, which are traditionally rice balls offered to ancestors, engaging in charity, dan punya, and also reciting the Bhagavad Gita.
And how often should these be done?
The sources emphasize consistency. They suggest these rituals should be performed regularly, consistently, for at least 3 years.
3 years, that's a significant commitment.
It really underscores the belief, doesn't it, that the living have this ongoing, profound responsibility to help liberate those who've passed on, especially when it's under these difficult circumstances like Akaal Mrityu.
Is there anything else recommended?
Yes, additionally, it's recommended that annually, family members should feed hungry Brahmins and also orphan children. This is seen as another way to generate merit and help the departed soul achieve liberation sooner.
So it connects personal ritual with broader acts of compassion.
Precisely. It highlights a kind of collective responsibility within this spiritual framework. It's not just about prayers, but actions too.
Wow. Okay, so we've taken a really fascinating, and I have to say, quite intense deep dive into this concept of untimely death, Akaal Mrityu, according to these ancient spiritual texts.
It's a lot to take in.
Yeah, from its varied causes,
Right.
Both the immediate physical ones and the deeper karmic layers, through to the really challenging fate described for these souls.
And even the specific remedies prescribed for finding peace. And the sheer depth of detail here, from those specific categories of wandering spirits, Buddha, Preta, and so on, right through to the rituals for peace, it really highlights a very structured, very intricate worldview of life and death. It certainly extends far beyond our usual, maybe more modern or secular understanding.
It really does.
And it truly forces you, I think, to consider actions not just in terms of their immediate earthly consequences, but their potential long-term spiritual impact.
Absolutely.
So the question it leaves us with, maybe for you listening, is how does this ancient perspective on untimely death, on the connection between actions and lifespan, prompt you to consider the choices you make today? And perhaps to reflect on the deeper meaning of life itself, and maybe even death?